So now we're going to hear from Marshall Shepard, a world-leading meteorologist and professor at the University of Georgia. He's an expert on climate change, in particular how it affects urban environments, and he's a noted science communicator and celebrity on the Weather Channel. So Marshall, I guess I'd love to ask you first is, what are you most concerned about when it comes to climate change, and what would you share with people in terms of why we should be caring about this important issue?
I'm concerned about so many things. It's hard to distill that down, but I wrote something in Forbes about how we really should see climate change and the climate crisis as a national security issue. And I say that because it impacts public health, our economy, infrastructure, water supply issues, what I call the so what factors. I think people are decoupled from the fact that this is not about a polar bear, about some butterfly habitat in the year 2080. It's about kitchen table issues now. So as an atmospheric scientist, I'm concerned about increases in extreme weather events, particularly hurricanes, drought, and flooding, because that has impacts that are readily obvious to people. I'm also concerned as an African American about inequity issues and vulnerability issues in marginalized and frontline communities who aren't contributing a large portion to the carbon footprint, but are likely the most vulnerable. So I'd say those are the two things that keep me up at night most right now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really important for folks to recognize that it's not just the thermometers that are affected, of course, it's like everything. When we think about our weather and climate, it's our food, our water, extreme events, our health, our national security in the long run, even like sea levels, where cities are going to be and how they function. That's really crucial. And I love the point too you make too. It's really this injustice of the people who are kind of emitting the least pollution are often the folks who are going to be hit hardest, both today and in the future. We have kind of an inequity today, of course, along racial and economic lines, but also people in the future who aren't even born yet are going to be bearing the cost of this as well, just so we could have a little bit more comfortable lifestyle today. How do we reconcile some of that, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I grew up in a community where people are probably not thinking about climate change, but there's an old saying in that community, which is when the rest of the world gets a cold, our community gets the flu. And I think it's really symbolic of what we see nationally and globally in terms of marginalized and frontline communities. When we talk about the idea of climate refugees, there are going to be nations where they're going to have to leave their countries because of sea level rise or because of reductions in agricultural productivity, perhaps in Africa. We saw a little of it with Hurricane Maria in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico. There are people that have been displaced from their homes because of that extreme weather climate event. So I think from a policy standpoint, from a humanitarian standpoint, we have to take what we know about the science and really start thinking about the policy implications, not just of reducing carbon emissions so that we can limit to 1.5 or 2 degrees of C of warming, but fundamentally how we deal with these equity issues, climate injustice issues, and the health and economic crisis that will come to bear in some of these communities.
This is a really interesting point because you and I are both trained as atmospheric scientists, and our first training is probably to talk about the physics of this. And I think our community's done that for decades, and might have fallen on deaf ears a little bit. And some of our friends in the environmental movement maybe talked about the polar bears and things like this, but it's really like you said, the kind of kitchen table issues of like, hey, this is about jobs, this is about the health of your kids, this is about our communities and how we're going to be living in the future or today.
Yeah.
Doesn't that connect so much better to almost everybody? And it crosses those kind of partisan divides we run into too much, don't you think?
I absolutely think it does. One of the things that I have been actually buoyed by in recent years is I think we are starting to erode some of the denialism that's out there. Remember, there was I know this is sort of a training 101 type discussion, and it's important to recall for folks that may not know some of the things that John and I know. There was a significant disinformation campaign for climate change over the years, rooted in the same climate misinformation, I'm sorry, science misinformation we saw with things like the tobacco industry and smoking and so forth. Uh, Upton Sinclair said it's difficult to get a person to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And that is at the root of what we've seen. But now I think we're past that. People see the floods, they see the drought, They see the increased gas prices when the Hurricane Michael barrels through the Gulf of Mexico and shuts off the oil rigs, that, and so you get gas prices. They see the increase in cereal prices when there's drought in the Midwest. So I think we as scientists, you're right, we've spent a lot of time saying, okay, this is coming, it's going to happen, and it's probably going to be bad. But the reality is, at times, I think people may sometimes either tune that out or say, oh, they're just being hyperbolic. But now people see the impact on their lives. And I think we as scientists have to be the stakeholders and the brokers to communicate that.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm a little more cynical, I wonder if we're doing a better job communicating this stuff, or maybe Mother Nature is for
Well,
us.
I think that's a little. I think it's a little bit of both. But yeah, when you're seeing in Georgia, for example, a Cat 5 Hurricane Michael with still 100-mile-per-hour winds inland in the state of Georgia, destroying our pecan and cotton and peanut crops, I think people get it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, when we think about climate change, we've done a lot of work thinking about the problems that we just talked about how bad it's going to be, how it's affecting some people more than others, and the incredible kind of unfairness and injustice that's creating. But let's look at the other side of the street. There are solutions to climate change. That's what this whole class is about. And some of them are right at our fingertips, and a lot of them are going to make the world better if we think about it the right way. So I would love to hear kind of from your perspective, where do you see some of the most exciting kind of opportunities for solutions, not only to the climate crisis, but things that could actually help kind of make a lot of our other problems better too?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've always sort of scoffed at this notion that a world that's built upon renewable energy is bad. A world where we're not emitting less particulate matter is bad. Those are all good things, and they're all things that will come as we move into the solution space. And of course, you and your engagement and involvement with Project Drawdown has inspired efforts locally, like our Drawdown Georgia effort, which I'm involved in. Thanks to the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. And, even just small things like composting, which is going to emerge as one of the solutions for the state of Georgia, which came out of the drawdown space, increased rooftop solar, things that you may not think about, like even family planning in terms of population and so forth, these what we call in the drawdown Georgia beyond carbon type issues. These are all things that people can do, plant-based diets, shifting. And I'll just give a personal account. I mean, even in our own home, we have not completely shifted away from meat, but my daughter's a pescatarian, and we have a meatless Monday. Small things. I have two composting rotators in my backyard that I use in my garden. So just these small things. But so I will emphasize that there are things that we can do at the locals and regional levels, but we are still going to need the large transformational policy solutions at the national and international levels as well. So there are things that we can certainly do. And I encourage people to, and perhaps it's a part of the curriculum, to take a look at the Project Drawdown and the Drawdown book, because there are great solutions in there. But I'm equally encouraged by these more local and state efforts like Drawdown Georgia, so that you can really zero in with what works best for your local state and communities.
Yeah, it's funny. Right now, there seems to be kind of a debate in the world we occupy sometimes, especially among the kind of more activist community. Some people want to put on a blinder and say it's all about policy, and so Washington's going to solve this for us, or the UN, or whoever. And then, of course, there are folks who say, no, it's personal actions. It's you and me at home doing this. And I think, what you just said and what I believe too is kind of like it's all the above and everything in
Yeah.
between. And a lot of climate policy is actually determined at the local level. It's stuff that you don't think about much, but like, the zoning board, can I put solar panels on my condo or not? Or the homeowners association, or the folks that determine where the buses go and whether there's a subway through your town or not, that kind of thing. And so, local efforts, businesses, international efforts, as well as homes, we all got to be part of this, don't we?
We certainly do. I mean, for example, here in my subdivision, I can't put solar panels on my home, but I researched and found that my local power provider has a community solar program that I can invest in my utility bill every month. So I'm engaged in that. So, even though there have been shenanigans at the national level in the U.S. over the last 4 or so years in terms of pulling out of the Paris Agreement and so forth, I am encouraged by things that I have seen my local communities, state governments, faith-based communities. Here in Georgia and perhaps Southeast, AT&T, for example, recently issued its climate resiliency challenge, and because they know the climate impacts their bottom line. And so there has been movement, even as there's a lot of sort of innuendo and some policy decisions going on at the national level. So I'm encouraged by that. But I want to build on one point you made. It's not even just sort of these local things surrounding carbon. In cities, your backdrop is a city. You're in Minneapolis right now. I'm in the Atlanta suburbs. We know that there are urban heat islands, for example, and exacerbated by extreme heat waves and climate change. There are local policy actions that can involve just strategic greening or use of high albedo or reflective surfaces on pavements that can have immediate cooling impacts as well. So it is a basket of solutions as opposed to putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, I like that. Well, you're a world-renowned expert on urban heat islands. That's one of your major contributions to our research community, among so many other things. And cities are really, really important because more than half of us in the world live in a city now. It's where a lot of these impacts, both of the local kind of microclimate changes we affect, but then the global warming effects are going to be manifest at the local level where we live. I sometimes say like, the global mean temperature, like, where's that? I don't know where that place is. I know what it is in Minneapolis today, in Atlanta, but where's the average? I don't know. But city design is like a very crucial point, like how we build cities in terms of how we use energy, how we get around. We could do it so much better. We can make cities that are more walkable, that are more cleaner air and more thriving and more fun and more interesting and safer and be good for climate change, can't we?
Oh, yeah, it's interesting, John. I'm actually collaborating with a group of engineers at Georgia Tech. We just submitted a pre-proposal to the National Science Foundation for an ERC, an Engineering Research Center, and the whole concept is engineering cities for thermal justice. And we think we can fundamentally that we. I'm working with and this is really a lesson for the students or those involved in this class. I'm an atmospheric scientist, but I am actually working with a team of mechanical engineers who've spent most career thinking about how to remove heat from server farms for Apple and Google. But they came to me and said, we can do this at the city scale. And we need your help thinking about it. And so we're fundamentally thinking about not just sort of vegetation and high albedo, but fundamentally engineering and taking that excess urban heat and repurposing it and making it equitable across the city so that in those communities that were redlined in decades past and are now suffering vulnerability to heat, we can make heat more equitable within a city using engineering concept, building materials, concepts of heat pipes that are used in computers. They're scaling this up to cities. It's amazing technology, and we certainly hope we get an opportunity to do it because we think there's a greater good. It's not just some geeky science thing that we love, as I'm a weather and a science geek, but this really could have an impact on how we comfortably live in cities. Since, as you noted, we're an urbanized society where the majority of the world's population lives in cities, and by 2030, that might be up to 60 to 65% of the population.
Yeah, and what an opportunity it is too to kind of reimagine how cities work in so many different ways, not just on the environment and all this kind of geeky stuff about energy use and temperatures, but kind of who gets to live in what way and how we all do it. And you mentioned like how cities have this painful history of redlining entire communities, and this racial and economic injustices persist into the 21st century, which is kind of shocking, but maybe not. And I'm here in Minneapolis where, George Floyd was murdered last summer here. And so this is kind of front and center for a lot of us. But as an African American, this is, your lived experience in a way that I will never know. And so it's really interesting to see these come together now and realize we can build the world better now. If we think about environmental issues and justice issues and resilience overall, there's so many opportunities for us to be a better country, a better society. And like you said, I sometimes think we're going to eventually solve this climate problem and turn around and say, what took us so damn long? This is great. We're living a lot better now.
Exactly. No, and I think it's interesting as you said something earlier that I think is true. People always accuse scientists of being exaggerating and over the top, but I think inherently, as you and I know, John, our colleagues and scientists tend to be careful and probably a bit conservative in our results and our findings. But the problem with that has been all of the things we expected to happen 30 years ago were happening with a vengeance. They're happening perhaps on a scale are at a pace beyond what we predicted. And I think we've undertold that story because of our desire to be cautious. So I think we are seeing things happening now. But I think, again, because industry, the military, faith-based communities are now on board in the solution space, and then we have efforts like Project Drawdown and so forth. I think we can now empower the technology and empower smart people and innovative people to think about these solutions in ways that we now haven't been able to, because the debate has been, is global warming real? Or do you believe in global warming? No, my kid used to believe in the tooth fairy. It's not a belief.
Yeah, it's like I love that, the word analogy too. Like, well, we could argue about the existence of gravity, but I'm falling down and hurting myself. That's the problem. We can argue about the theory of gravity, but I've just sprained my knee.
We've moved beyond that. Even in the last presidential debate, there are 6 topics that have been chosen. Ironically, or fortunately, I guess, 2 of them are climate change and race. And also one is coronavirus handling as well. Interestingly enough, in the year that has been 2020, all of those things are interwoven together. So I don't even think they can be decoupled. So I'm pleased to see that they're part of the agenda now.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a different topic, but 2020 seems to be a year of shattering things we didn't want to talk about, and old myths that were convenient but not true.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is when we think about addressing climate change, and I think you and I see there's a lot of opportunity here. It isn't just a challenge. Yes, we're going to have to spend some money. Yes, we're going to have to do things differently. And that's going to be pretty inconvenient for a few people and very powerful people. But the rest of us actually could be better off. And when I think about all the jobs that could be created, retrofitting buildings that we're going to have to do, to rethink our transportation, to rethink agriculture, all these things, if we're smart about it, this could be one of the biggest business and job opportunity moments in human history. And what's really cool is the real heroines and heroes of climate solutions are probably going to be the blue collar workers, folks who are going to get their fingernails dirty, doing the real work of fixing our infrastructure and rebooting the country. What a great opportunity for us in so many ways. Do you see that in Georgia and other places you've been?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely do. That's why I've been baffled by this sort of economic argument that climate change and our solution space is going to hamper the economy. It's going to explode the economy from the lens that I look at. Already jobs in wind energy and solar are some of the leading job producers in this country. And it's not just white collar jobs, it's blue collar jobs as well. But as you know, we have a stormwater management system in cities and in rural communities that are designed for the 1970s rainstorms, not the 2020 rainstorms. And so that infrastructure is going to have to be redone. Agricultural practices are going to have to rethink fundamentally their rotations and drought resistant seeding. So there are all kinds of opportunities. We will figure this out and the economy will be better off for it. So I frown upon this notion that somehow this is an economic challenge. I suspect in the Industrial Revolution, when they did figure out how to burn fossil fuels, coal and gas and so forth, there was a vigorous sort of industrial infrastructure boom that happened to support that. But look what happened because of it. Well, we're in the climate industrial revolution now, and I think we'll see the same economic growth and prosperity. So I just hope that when we do it, John, and we figure out how to do these things, we're doing it with equity in mind.
Absolutely, yeah. That's going to be one of the big challenges, of course. And often when people say, "Oh, that's not economical," you get to read the subtitle on the screen, which really says, "It's very inconvenient for some powerful people right now, so we don't want to talk about it."
That is correct. Exactly. Yeah, we've seen that throughout history, not just with this, even with coronavirus and other things. There are always some agendas that are limited and narrow and not necessarily for the greater good.
So you're a really great communicator of climate science, and I know you spend so much time and energy doing that. And thank you for doing that. It's so important for our community.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know how hard it is. But a lot of people ask this question of, like what buoys you, what kind of keeps you going, or what even gives you hope about the future? Because sometimes we're told these stories about how terrible everything's going to be, usually by people who are trying to divide us. But I want to look for stories about how actually, if we choose to, we can build a better future and bring people together. So how do we kind of get there? How do we find the hope and the energy and the kind of the fortitude, if you will, to get to that better place? What buoys you?
What buoys me are one of them sitting 2 floors above me. I'm in the basement in my studio, but my daughter, who's in high school, up doing digital learning right now, and my son's in middle school right now. Those two kids and the kids, and they're not really kids that I see every day almost when I'm at the University of Georgia, because they get it on climate change. They haven't been polluted by the marinades that they've been sort of soaking in for decades, like many of the older generation. So they understand the impact and power and risk of climate change. So when I see their energy, I know that there's hope. We can get sort of deflated by sort of the inertia of the old school, as I call it. But because I'm around youth, that buoys me. But I think we see, and we have to start telling, as you noted, these climate stories. I think we can't just continue to show on charts and graphs and jargony things in our social media and in our media. We've got to tell the climate stories, as we've done here in Georgia. There actually is something called the Georgia Climate Project, and I'm involved with that. And we actually have a website that tells climate stories, real Georgians, and how they overcame climate change or thought about ways to advance solution space. The blueberry industry, for example, in Georgia is burgeoning because of science and technology at my university. But within that, they still have vulnerabilities to climate. So we talk to a blueberry farmer and we tell that story. I think people resonate with stories. I think they resonate with, there's studies that show that people resonate with what things were like in the past as opposed to this gloomy and doomy future. So I think we, as you know, John, we have to be strategic and tactical about how we tell the climate story.
We see so much of the national debate has been framed of red versus blue and things like this. Georgia is a really kind of an interesting tension place of this, a lot of different kind of political things. But when you get to the solution side, a lot of that seems to be melting away thanks to work like yours and others. So like, hey, we can be practical. And when we get the politicians out of the way, actually, we find there's a lot more common ground.
I think that's right. I mean, Georgia is considered a red state, although I would argue right now it's probably more purplish. But irrespective of that, even when it was deeply red, you got the Ray C. Anderson Foundation, and you've got the Drawdown Georgia effort, and you've got Georgia Climate Project, and you've got great climate programs at Georgia Tech, Emory, and so forth. We even have a state house member named Chuck F. Strachan. He represents my district. He's a Republican, but he introduced a climate change study bill within the state house. It's actually being considered right now. He wants to form a committee to think about moving the state forward politically on climate. So when you get beyond all of the rhetoric and you look at Georgia, people would consider a red state. We're one of the leading states in solar. So the narratives maybe tell you one thing, but when you dig a little bit deeper, I think it shows that people, industry, and stakeholders understand that this is a crisis.
Yeah, that's one of the things that buoys me sometimes. You scratch under that partisan surface, you find a little bit of common sense. And you find real leaders, not the politicians, who are in business in our local communities and our faith-based organizations, our schools, and so on, who say, hey, wait a minute. It makes sense to be more efficient. It makes sense to build things like promote jobs and healthier communities. Let's just not argue about it. Let's just do the common sense things. And maybe we need a little more of that right now and not so much hot air.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sure the pun was intended.
A little bit. Well, hey, thanks, Marshall. It's been really great talking to you, and I really appreciate your perspectives on all this. And also thanks for being such an incredible leader nationally and internationally on these issues. It's so important that scientists step up, but also use a voice that can be heard across so many different communities and so effectively.
Thank you, John. I mean, I think if voices like yours and mine and others aren't there, people with disingenuous motives or biases are happy to fill the gap that we leave.
That's for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, and have a great rest of your day.